welcome back to the One Tree Hill Rewatch here on the Filmaholic channel. Today I'm talking about the season 6 finale of One Tree Hill. We made it here to the end of season 6. We're that far. It's bittersweet because I'm glad we're moving through it. I'm enjoying seeing Sarah's reaction to everything. And the season 6 finale is one of my favorite episodes of the whole series. It's my second favorite episode of the whole series. But it's also Lucas and Peyton's last episode. Lucas does come back, of course, for one more episode in season 9, but as a couple, it's the last episode, Peyton's last episode. The show really changes after this, and it isn't really the same moving forward, although, I'm not saying that they're all, I like season 7, I like season 9. But yeah, it's going to be a lot different after this, and it's really fun talking about it because it takes me back to the time of my life when I was younger and got to watch this stuff being filmed. I'm just really nostalgic about it. And so the episode is titled 624. It's titled Remember Me as a Time of Day, which I think was a perfect title for this episode. It originally aired May 18th, 2009, and was written and directed by Mark Schwann. Now, like the season 4 finale, this is written as a series finale. So if the show had not came back after season 6, you would have been fine. You got everything, for the most part, wrapped up. I mean, there's obviously other stuff that's loose that the main thing that's loose that I would have been upset about moving forward is Dan, and I'm probably in the minority here that would have been upset because Dan's storyline. I like that we get the 9 seasons because Dan gets his complete character arc and redemption by the time the show's over. If the show had ended here, there would have been some hope left for him, a spark of hope, but his storyline would be the only one that I feel like definitely needed a continuation because Nathan Haley's is pretty much wrapped up. Brooke isn't wrapped up, but it was a good ending point if that had been the ending, and Lucas and Peyton's obviously done in terms of the show. The episode opens picking up where the last episode ended. The cliffhanger, Peyton passed out. Lucas takes her to the hospital. His blood's everywhere. We see him washing his hands. He's got the wedding ring on. We have this awesome song called War Sweater by Wakey Wakey playing over. This is Wakey Wakey's debut music-wise in the show. Obviously in season 7, they have more music, and Michael Grubbs actually plays a character called Grubbs, the bartender, in season 7, which I really like because I love Wakey Wakey. Right off the bat, one of the first scenes shows Dan's back. He's visiting Keith's grave. It's going to be a big part of this episode. I really love the shot at the beginning where we're seeing Peyton be in the operating room. The baby's going to be born, and we see the viewing window. We see Lucas there. Then we see Brooke, Haley, Nathan, Julian, and they kind of all fade in, and how many people care for Peyton and how many people show up, and I love that. The baby's born. We see Lucas with the baby at home, so at least a day's passed. Then we cut inside the hospital room after some more time's passed, and I like the gesture, like what they were going for was sweet, that Lucas kept making these root beer floats for Peyton, but also, you wouldn't have just made those root beer floats each day and left them in the room. Bugs would have came. The hospital would not have allowed you to do that. Somebody would have cleaned it up. Anyways, it's a show. I know. Whatever. He's making these root beer floats for Peyton to wake up. The baby doesn't have a name yet. He doesn't know what baby wanted to be named. She had mentioned 2 names before, Anna, which I'm glad they didn't go with because there was already a character named Anna. But Anna after her mom, if it was a girl, or if it was a boy, Sawyer. Which they ended up going with the name Sawyer, but it is a girl. I love it. This is my favorite baby name that they have on the show. Is Sawyer for their kid, Sawyer Scott. Loved it. Loved it. They actually had a baby girl too. Thought all that was great. And Peyton wakes up. Karen brings the baby in. Karen brings Sawyer in, so Karen's back. We have a little sweet moment. But actually before that, Brooke is the first one that comes in, and there's a little sweet scene between them, and then Karen brings the baby in. And then everybody comes in. Everybody. Julie and everybody comes in to the room. So then all that happens. Nathan goes back to Charleston. His locker's cleaned out. What's going on? Leaves you in suspense there. He comes back, tells Haley the story. Turns out, made it into the NBA. Mal finds out. We see him celebrating at the station. And I like this finale, too, from Mal and Millicent because they don't have a lot of storyline here. They're just kind of together. and it's nice. And Mouth's at the news station giving us news in the episode about Nathan, and that's how Jamie finds out, is from watching Mouth in the news and gets really happy about his dad making it to the NBA. But I like that stuff with Mouth. There was no, obviously we get into season 7, and we've already done it with season 5. There's trouble with him in the news station. It's always terrible because it's stuff that makes sense. He's supposed to report on this stuff, but then they're his friends, so he doesn't want to, and it's troublesome for him. And that's something we're going to talk about next season, but we're not there yet. So Nathan makes it into the NBA. Now, there's also, like I said before, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but there's Mia Chase stuff in this episode too. Throughout the episode of them getting the CDs, Mia's album, she has a signing at the end of the episode at Best Buy. Chase shows up, they love each other, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So, back to the important stuff. Dan, he's back. We see him at this farmhouse. What's going on? Whitey walks out with a cowboy hat on and a horse. He's there to see Whitey. What's happening? Dan, and then we get to one of my favorite scenes of the entire series, and that's between Dan and Whitey. And they do have a cut that cuts to some other stuff within that scene, but oh man, it's just, I love how it's written, I love how it's shot, and I love the performances, especially from Paul Johansson, but from Barry Corbin too. But Dan is talking about how he wished he went back in that game. That's where it all went wrong, the state championship, and for refusing to play. And he's telling Whitey he's sorry because that's, sorry for everything he's done and all the stuff that he's done to the people around him. And he's sorry for what he did to Keith and the people who loved Keith. And it's just, Paul's grew some facial hair out in this episode. Really deep into Dan, the character. His eyes are red, like he's been crying, stressed. Whitey sets out, a gun when he brings out coffee and cookies, and he sets out a gun. He's like, I could just shoot you and say that you broke in and came at me. And Dan's like, you'd be doing me a favor. And he's like, you look like a haunted man. But then after he says that about Keith and, apologizing for everything, Whitey goes, did you ever love him? And Dan says, not enough. Oh man, it's so incredible. I love that. If I ever make a show, I hope that I can write something as good as that scene because I loved it. And then it cuts back to it. It cuts to a different scene, then it cuts back to it. And then Dan takes the gun and considers shooting himself and killing himself. And he can't do it. He throws the table out of the way and grabs Whitey and points and has Whitey take the gun and points it at Dan's chest and says, pull the trigger, please. Make the pain go away. I just, great performance. And then Whitey pushes the gun out of the way and says, maybe you're still here for redemption. And they embrace each other and hug. And it's perfect for those characters. That everything that we know they've been to before the series that we never really saw, but we knew about, and then the stuff in the high school years and everything with them, and then not really liking each other, and then to this moment, because they have been around each other for since Dan was a teenager, like with that basketball game, before that basketball game, when Dan was developing, Whitey was there. Almost like a father figure to Dan that Dan didn't want to accept. But now he's there. Dan's parents we never see again, which I think was a mistake. But we never see them again. But we do see Whitey, and we do see him go and talk to him and ask him for forgiveness. And then after that, when Dan's leaving, and Whitey says, maybe you're still here for redemption. Which, two things. One, that heavily inspires Dan to create his show and everything that happens in season 7 with him. But it also lays the groundwork for the entire rest of the series, which I think it's almost like a trilogy, 7, 8, 9 of seasons. But really, to me, from that moment forward, from where Whitey says you're still here for redemption to Dan's last moments, is a character is a whole. I mean, he's been on this redemption arc for a while, but that whole thing is what we're going to get for the rest of the series and what really matters to me, of core of what's left. Like, if you didn't have that in there, I don't really think there would have been a whole lot of reasoning to have the later seasons, but that's just me. But he leaves the house and Nathan shows up. Nathan talks to Dan and he says, I'm just here to tell my coach that I made it to the NBA, and he's there to see Whitey. And Dan doesn't say anything, but just the looks tell everything. And he watches Nathan until Nathan goes inside Whitey's house. And Nathan looks back at Dan before he goes inside. And then you see Dan smile. Dan smiles at the fact that Nathan made it to the NBA. And you can tell he's so happy that his son made it. But then the smile vanishes. He sinks back into his life and the misery that he carries around with him. And then the music stops and he walks off into the distance. Beautiful scene. Love it. So then all that happens. We touch on Brooke and Julian again. Julian's been staying with Brooke while Peyton's been in the hospital. He's about to leave. Before he leaves, they end up having sex again. And then he does leave. And he goes back to LA, which we'll touch on before the end of this episode. We also, the next time we see Dan, he is walking and he comes across Peyton. And Peyton's holding Sawyer. And it's an awkward moment at first because Peyton's like, oh, and, tries and get up to like leave. And Dan's like, can I hold her? And she's like, no. And it's awkward because you feel the awkwardness between both of them because of the situation that Peyton's in. Not only just for Dan in general, but the fact how Lucas would react, but then also for Dan getting that rejection and just the sadness that Paul delivers with that character is amazing. And then she says, why? And he says, because she's the only one in my world that doesn't know what I've done. And she lets him hold the baby. And it's a really sweet scene, the music playing and showing Dan hold the baby and just his world light up from holding this child that is a descendant of him. And they have a little bit of dialogue, and then he goes to leave and he says, I'm sorry, I know one day you'll have to tell her about me, and I'm sorry for that. And then as he's leaving, Karen and Lucas pass him. And that's the last time, that last scene that they have together, ever. Which I wish that we could have got another Karen and Dan. Well, I don't know. No, I take that back. I like the way that was. I think that was perfect because really the stuff there's no changing the stuff between Dan and Karen, and the scene they had when he was in jail was enough for me for their ending. And as far as voices go, but this scene was very powerful because you just saw the look. Lucas is in the scene too, and that's the last time that Lucas is with Dan. But to me, the final great moment between Lucas and Dan was 609 when Dan says, every story has a villain, Lucas, I'm sorry, I'm yours. That was a great ending for them. And but just seeing that look between Dan and Karen of everything that's happened in their life, and then her walking away, and I think that was powerful and enough for me to be okay with that being the ending for them. And I know there was some talk about Lucas originally, them considering him coming back for Danny Boy, the 11th episode of season 9, which is my favorite episode. At least right now. Maybe it'll change. Don't think so when I rewatch it. But there was some talk about him coming back in that episode, and I don't think he should have. I actually think he should have come back for the episode after that, because I don't know what else you could have told with him and Dan that we don't already have. Like the scene with Dan and Nathan in that episode is my favorite scene of the series, and it wouldn't have worked with Lucas there. But that's me going off on a different topic that we can talk about when we get there. Brooke and Peyton, they have their final scene in the episode where you find out the baby's name is Sawyer Brooke Scott, and you also find out that Peyton made Brooke the godmother, although she will never be part of her life and we'll never see them together. But that happens, and that's their final scene together, so that's bittersweet. Once again, another issue that I have that Peyton does not come back for Brooke's wedding, which is completely out of character for Peyton. And they make an excuse that Sawyer's sick, which is just lame because they didn't want to try to ask. They didn't want to work out something with Hillary Burton, bring her back. And maybe Hillary Burton didn't want to come back because of the March 1 thing, which is completely understandable. But that whole situation is fucked up. Then after that, we have the stuff with Brooke and Victoria, which is nice and kind of completes that storyline that they've been developing with Brooke and Victoria, where Brooke had that vision in season 5 of how she wanted her mom to talk to her and tell her that she loved her and all this different stuff. And Victoria does it in this episode. Tells Brooke, hey, you got to go after Julian. You got to go to L.A. You got to be with him. And I'm sorry that I love you. And the company is yours. And she gives Brooke the company. And then Brooke decides to keep her own, obviously, in New York and running the company. And that way we see Victoria in every season after this in some capacity. But it was a really good scene between the two of them. And I actually am glad that they had They probably could have eased into it a little bit more and stretched it out a little bit more. I feel like maybe brought Victoria back a little bit sooner. But I actually think the Victoria redemption was important for Brooke's character. And was nice. The stuff with her dad, I hate. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But actually, I like this one for the most part. Nathan... Well, actually, before we get there... after that moment, we start going into the end of the episode, and the music, the Can't You See by the Marshall Tucker Band's playing. We go to the final voiceovers, and we've seen all these final shots of the end of the episode, which could have been the end of the series and the shots. So we see Lucas first showing Peyton the comet that is repaired, which is great. We see Nathan and Jamie and Haley and Charlotte. He's introduced onto the Charlotte Bobcats. He's playing. Then we see Dan waiting to die on the river court by himself. And we see Brooke and Julian in L.A. She finds her way somehow onto this movie set where Julian is and says, I love you. And they kiss. And the lights light up behind them as if they're in a movie. Great scene. Good ending for them if this had been the end. And then... the final scene of the episode it's sort of the characters driving off into the sunset, and I don't know if that's what it's supposed to be, but it's definitely them driving off into the sunrise when they were filming, because they filmed it in the morning, early in the morning. It was cold outside when they filmed this too, because this is a scene that I watched them film. Lucas and Peyton's final scene on One Tree Hill, so I'm very happy about that. Obviously at the time I did not know that this was their final scene. So that's really cool that I got to experience that. But Lucas and Peyton and Sawyer are in the car, and they drive off into the distance. And then the camera moves back over the Cape Fear River, and we move over to the river court, and we look at that, and the show's over. Season 6 is over, and Lucas and Peyton are gone. The next video I'll be showing you pictures of my visit for the season 6 finale, talking about a little bit more in depth about that, and give you some behind the scenes stuff. And then we're on to season 7, guys. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys soon.